Number one, we cannot spend our children's money. We are looking on the edge of a revolution of young people who are starting to realize that we, our generation, have put them $4 trillion in debt, and they don't like it, and they shouldn't. Don't we love our children as much as our parents loved us? Sure we do. We cannot spend their money. Now then, that's the easy decision. The hard decision is, how do you fix it? We've got to put everybody that's breathing back to work in a good, solid job. Then you've got a growing tax base. But in the meantime, you've got to have a real grab and rudman that stops the deficit spending, so you don't lose any more financial blood. Then with the growing tax base, you pay off $4 trillion, and we leave the American dream to our children.
So that was Ross Perot in the early 90s talking about our $4.6 trillion deficit, how that was going to hurt the future generations, Gen Xers, Millennials, and Gen Zers. So what have we done in the past 30 years to remedy that? Absolutely nothing. In fact, we have increased the deficit from $4.5 trillion to $33 trillion, 8 times the amount that he was concerned. And you wonder why the Millennials and Gen Zers are so frustrated today.
Really know if this is my last time, but what I know is I'm feeling just fine. My life is like a red carpet, and I'm feeling like the richest millionaire. This is my local mayor, and I'm the biggest star around here. What's happening, fam? L.A.R. movement still moving. Subscribe or die trying. You see the thumbnail. More importantly, you saw the clip. Why they blame the boomers. 1992. 92, I was like 11. You know what I'm saying? 11, 12. So I graduated in 97 at 17. So, it could have 11, 12 could have been, depending on we talking, right? The interesting thing about that is this. This is what happens when people don't necessarily know history. The debt wasn't from 92 to 2024, because when Clinton got in office, he balanced the budget. So I would say from like 2000 to 2002, 2001, 2002, we were in the plus until 9/11 happened, basically. And when 9/11 happened, let's go to war, and we've been going downhill fiscally ever since, right? And the issue is what Ross Perot was talking about. Do we love our children? Ross Perot obviously isn't a baby boomer, but Ross Perot was looked at as an odd character, odd big-eared guy who, he's not, he's on I think he's an independent, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a minute. But these were people who inherited America on the upswing, and they got it. And people even bring up the Reagan era, right? Well, Reagan put the country in debt, and Bush added to that. And if y'all don't remember, that was one of the reasons why Bush didn't get reelected. But it was more so because he was out of touch. And what I mean is, at the time, one of the nails in the coffin was they took him to a grocery store and they had the scanning, doot, doot, and which was, it was newer technology, but it had been around enough to know what it is. And George Bush didn't know, what none of that was, because it wasn't his lifestyle to go to the grocery store, obviously. And then people was like, well, if a guy can't even go to the grocery store, how can he be the president? That was one of those things that was one of those type of things that happened. So that's how Clinton, it's one of the things that got Clinton in office. He was younger, people liked him more, he was smoother, whatever. Ask Monica Lewinsky, he got game, right? But with all the fighting between the House, Senate and all that, he turned the country around and put his country in a surplus. So at the end of the day, he was looked at as the most successful president because the country had money to burn, to the point where Bush gave money to everybody. I want to say 2000, 2001, something like that, before 9/11, if I'm not mistaken. And then 9/11 happened, and we're going to war. It could have been after 9/11, now that I think about it. But what we're seeing now is, do these people care? And it's like, no, they don't care. What are you talking about? The 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, I would say that was the uptick of college tuition just starting to balloon. You know, um, that's when I remember it being tens of thousands of dollars, 20, 30. People were in $250,000 debt, depending on the type of school they went to. If they went to a upper echelon school, they definitely could be in six-figure debt. You know, Rice, Tulane. Not, I'm even talking about outside of Ivy League. You know what I'm saying? Cal's. Um, other schools you might wind up with 80, 90,000. It would vary from person to person. But Texas A&M, all that. So why people are blaming boomers is because basically the country had a surplus in it. If some of y'all may not remember this, one of the reasons Barack Obama became president was his stance on the war in Iraq. It was like we shouldn't go because it's going to ruin us. So that was really the defining moment in the beginning of him having a presidential campaign, because I think he was the only senator at the time who was against it. And years later, people was like he was right, but the country was so dug in that they couldn't pull out. Even when he was president, he couldn't just leave. So boomers got more and more and more blame, because the Enron scandal happened, and I was, about, I was about to say the Big Short, but the housing bubble burst. Um, it was something else that happened during that time period. A bunch of natural disasters, but the car industry went under. The banks, AIG went under. Lehman Brothers, all of that. So it began to look like these older people who were even in these big financial institutions and who are supposed to be movers and shakers, and the people who run the world were complete utter imbeciles because everybody was just getting screwed over. So as the debt ballooned and ballooned and ballooned up, people assumed that baby boomers would take this into consideration for the next generation. And no, that wasn't going to happen. And that's not going to happen, as you can see, because there are no solutions to this problem because they don't care. And at the time, that's like I said, 1992, where this clip is set. At that time period, you can see, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, right? And I don't know how Gen Z doesn't count in that one, because I don't think Gen Z was until like 97 or something, 96, 97. But because truthfully, they were born in surplus. I think that's probably Gen Z's biggest issue. They were actually born in surplus. They weren't born in a deficit. When they were born when this country, the beginning of them was born when this country was in a surplus. So that's part of a different mentality. So now what you're seeing is the dot-com bubble burst too. Now what you're seeing is people are blaming boomers because at the time these people were selling out to corporations. You know, people didn't like Donald Trump at that time period, even till maybe 10, 15 years later, until he started doing the Apprentice, because he was known for uh, pimping the bankruptcy game and also evading, having to actually pay taxes, which a lot of rich people did both of those, right? Because they changed the bankruptcy laws. Basically, you know, it might sound weird that I say it, but for lack of a better term, when black people started pulling the stunts that white people were pulling with just filing bankruptcy, filing for bankruptcy and keeping everything, they changed the bankruptcy laws because can't have them Negroes doing that. That was for white folks. So all of these laws were really enacted to get over, to get over, to get over, to get over, to get over. and there were no, they were deconstructing laws to actually make sure people pay their fair share and keep the country going in a positive direction. I think, which once again is why people blame boomers, because it's like, oh, you deconstructed this so you can get rich and you can do insider trading if you're in politics. And I remember being a child, and I lived in the DMV for a time period, and I saw, and that was my first um, ever sign of seeing that the government really don't care like that, because 80s, 90s. I don't even know if it lasted to the 2000s. I don't know, because I left in the 80s. The projects was behind the White House, and the Treasury. They print money at the Treasury, and the people surrounding DC were poor because it was the 80s, right? So if they didn't care about the people there, and I learned about diplomatic immunity as a young kid, because you would have people in the Senate, and buying prostitutes and drugs, but they couldn't get arrested because they, diplomatic immunity. They had the consul plates or whatever, so they can get away with whatever they wanted. And it was corruption run amok. Even the Iran Contra thing with the drugs, and the United States being in on it. And that wasn't baby boomers. I think that was the greatest generation, or the silent generation, one of them, because people were older then who were at the heads of that. So what you saw was people get accustomed to getting over, and basically, now you see it in this current political genre and generation, and people wonder why people skip over Generation X is because baby boomers are a huge population and millennials are a huge population. Gen X is the smallest group. So we don't actually have a lot of political power, have a lot of influence, created a lot of things for this era, but don't necessarily have a lot of political power. Um, so that's a whole different story. But ultimately, when people look at what's going on now, you're looking at boomers to fix it, and it's not. They're not going to do that. And you might be looking at millennials or Gen X to fix it, but I don't think you would want Gen X to fix it, because we would cut back on a whole lot of stuff, and then y'all will lose y'all minds, and y'all be like, we can't deal with the extreme cutbacks, because that's how our generation will work. Like, we need all this stuff, so you don't need all this stuff. Um, so millennials are like, I guess, the bridge between the future, but I don't think. Just know the boomers ain't gonna give you a shot. They gonna cut you off at the knees right before they die. But that's just my 2 cents about this. You tell me what you think. Like, share, subscribe, or die trying. Catch you on the next one. Peace.
All I ask is when you lay your head on that pillow at night, know I gave you everything I had.